Hi, welcome to the Neuro Revision Lab. Today we're going to take a look at cells, which is found in GCSE Science Biology Paper 1. Before we get underway, subscribe and punch the like button to see more neurodivergent revision materials, and later check out the NRL store. Together we have everything we need. So first up, you need to know about drawing diagrams. GCSE biology is chock full of diagrams, and having a practice is absolutely necessary to getting it right. Your diagram should have clear features, and you should be labeling key structures. Your diagram should be concise and efficient. The great news is, our brains are highly effective at recalling images and patterns, which give us a natural advantage. It's the spellings and the neatness that we can sometimes get hung up on. So if that being said, diagrams do not really have to be neat. Not if your diagrams are between us, our teachers, and the examiners. They only really have to do the job. So if your diagrams aren't exactly worthy of being framed and put on the wall, that doesn't matter as long as you can replicate them efficiently. So let's take a look at this first diagram. It's neat, it's accurate, it's also extremely difficult, really boring, and far too complicated. This isn't going to do us or anybody very much good outside of an exercise book. Now take a look at mine. I actually drew this with the computer. I can do a little bit better with a pen and paper, but the point is, this is accurate. It's efficient, and I drew it in just a few seconds. All right, so let's get those keywords down first. Open up your revision book and write down, spelled correctly, prokaryotic, eukaryotic, mitochondria, cytoplasm, cell membrane, and nucleus. Take some time to practice the spelling and sound them out. By sounding them out, you're giving your brain auditory cues for remembering how to spell them. You could also try breaking each word down into its syllables. Cells can broadly be separated into two groups. Prokaryotes, examples include bacteria, and they're amongst the oldest organisms on the planet. They are simpler and smaller, and they have very specific key features. Typically, you would study one of these under an electron microscope. The other category is eukaryotes, which is again split into two separate categories, animal cells and plant cells. They can exist as single cellular organisms, but they can also be large multicellular organisms. This includes me, you, and the plants on my windowsill. Taking a closer look at eukaryotes, here are two diagrams. One is a very typical animal cell, and the other is a plant cell. Now specifically, the animal cell looks to be a cheek cell. You might have done a practical before where you used a cotton bud to scrape the cells off from the inside of your cheek and place them under a light microscope to be able to see them. You would have seen the nucleus, but it's unlikely you would have seen any of the other structures inside, as they're just too small to see. The plant cell is a palisade cell. We have two clues that tell us that. One, it's square-shaped, as most palisade cells are depicted to be. And two, it contains chloroplasts. Those are the green bean-shaped structures. You likely used onion cells in a practical, as it's very easy for us to peel off one cell thin layers. Okay, so time to get stuck into these diagrams. You're going to need your revision notebook in front of you and spend a bit of time on this first version. But later on, when you're revising, you can refine this diagram down, drawing only the necessary structures and make it your own. Now, each part of this diagram shows what we would call an organelle. You could probably guess what an organelle is. It's just a very tiny organ, a small structure that does a very specific job. GCSE currently requires you to really only know a handful of them and what they do. Eukaryotic cells have a nucleus. This controls the cell and contains all the DNA packed up into a tight single structure. It's usually depicted as purple because that tends to be the colour that they turn when they are stained with methylene blue under a microscope. All through the centre of the cell is cytoplasm. This is where all the chemical reactions take place, and it contains enzymes, which we'll talk about later. This is the stuff that everything's floating in. These little pink kidney bean shaped objects, sometimes they're depicted with a squiggly structure inside. These are mitochondria. For us, these are very important for aerobic respiration, which converts glucose, our food, into energy. There is a huge section in GCSE which covers this in way more detail at the end of Biology 1. There's also the cell membrane, which is the barrier you can see all around the outside. This gives the cell a little bit of structure, but more importantly, controls which substances go into and out of the cell. For example, oxygen, water, and sugars going in, and carbon dioxide and waste products coming back out. Our last animal cell structure are the ribosomes. This is where proteins are made. Proteins help repair our bodies. They build new cells and they help us grow. That sums up what we would find in an animal cell. Don't forget to practice. Ideally, you should be able to draw one of these from scratch, labeling each one of the organelles and be able to explain what each structure does. Moving on to the plant cell now. Helpfully, a plant cell contains everything that an animal cell does, so that helps us out a lot. But plant cells contain 3 extra organelles that we need to learn. Plants don't have bones like animals do, so they have a cell wall. This provides structure and is made out of cellulose. The crunch you hear when you're biting into vegetables or fruit, that's the cellulose that you're breaking. In the centre is normally a permanent vacuole. They contain water, sugar, and salts. When you see a plant that's wilting because it's underwatered, that's because it's a vacuole that's shrunk. Give it some water and the vacuole fills back up and the plant returns to its normal shape. And our last organelle, chloroplasts. Just as important as mitochondria, this is the site of photosynthesis. Plants don't consume food the same way animals do. They make it from carbon dioxide in the air, water from its roots, using a little bit of sunlight to turn those 2 reactants into glucose. Glucose can then be used in the same way mitochondria uses it in our cells, converting it to energy or other useful products. Again, have a practice. Make sure that you can do these diagrams confidently and efficiently. I highly recommend that this be something that be put onto a flashcard and you have a practice with on a regular basis. So just a brief recap. Cells are split into 2 categories, prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes are typically bacteria, and eukaryotes are split into animal cells, that's us, and plant cells, such as the plant on my windowsill. Now let's take a real close look at a prokaryote. Okay, so prokaryotes, our third and final cell. Now, interestingly, I'd like to draw your attention to a particular aspect of neurodivergent people. With this on the screen, people that have some knowledge of prokaryotes and bacteria being one example are probably feeling a little bit uncomfortable. That's because you're associating emotions with an image and likely a relevant memory of being horribly sick from bad food. This is wonderfully useful for us as it makes several GCSE topics, such as health, bacterial diseases, and antibiotics, easier for us to link together. However, it can make us avoid revising certain topics, so we should be careful to manage that. So, prokaryotes are almost completely different because they are so very small. They have a cytoplasm, but they have no chloroplast or mitochondria inside of it. They have a cell membrane, but it's very thin and it sits just below the cell wall. Quite often in diagrams, it's not very well displayed. In my one here, it's barely visible. They do have a cell wall, which is quite often referred to as its capsule, and this could be covered in small tendrils or a mucus layer, or maybe even flagellum, which are whip-like structures sticking out of it. The real key difference is the DNA. There is one single strand of DNA, which we actually call RNA, and it's a disorganized, squiggly jumble instead of our really organized and compact and much larger eukaryotic nucleus. When drawing this, anything resembling a squiggle is sufficient. Okay, so bringing it all together into a revision board, this is what we should be roughly aiming for. If your revision doesn't look like this, that's absolutely fine. The best type of revision is always your type of revision. But this is here just for a little bit of guidance on what you should have in your books already. Okay, so this brings us neatly on to exam questions. This topic can be quite easy so long as we're taking our time to read the questions correctly. Question 1. Name the structure in a plant cell that supports the cell and is made of cellulose. Question 2. Which type of cell contains only a single strand of DNA? Plant cells, animal cells, or prokaryotic cells? Question 3. Compare the structure of a prokaryotic cell with an animal cell. Include at least 3 differences in your answer. Let's start by breaking down these questions with our CKC method. First, highlight the command words. This is telling you what you need to do. Now highlight the keywords. These are the words that you defined earlier, and now we need to confirm. This ensures we have read the questions properly at least twice. Question 3 actually has an additional criteria. You need at least 3 differences to make the grade. Now you can pause the video there and write these down. These are going to be useful to come back to later and attempt and assess later on your own. Good luck! Now just for a quick reminder, for more revision resources, tips and helpful materials, please visit the Neuro Revision Lab store. Everything there is specifically selected or made for neurodivergent learners, such as dyslexics, ADHDers, and those on the autistic spectrum. And as an added bonus, each purchase supports the channel, which allows us to keep producing revision content specifically made for us. Also, don't forget to subscribe. Punch the like button and leave any feedback in the comments section. We're always seeking to improve this channel and find the best way of working together. So back to our exam questions. The answer for question 1, name the structure in a plant cell that supports the cell and is made of cellulose, is the cell wall. Its function is to provide structure. Question 2. Which type of cell contains only a single strand of DNA? Plant cells, animal cells, or prokaryotic cells? It is, of course, prokaryotic cells. They have no nucleus, only a single strand of DNA. Question 3. Compare the structure of a prokaryotic cell with an animal cell. Include at least 3 differences in your answers. Now here we have a bracket. Level 1, which only really is applicable for simple statements that lacks clarity. And level 2, where you can get the most marks, and that is for clear comparison of the structural differences. So to answer, you should say something like, but not necessarily exactly the same as: prokaryotic cells do not have a nucleus. Prokaryotic cells do not have mitochondria. Prokaryotic cells have a cell wall, but animal cells do not. Animal cells are eukaryotic. Bacterial cells are prokaryotic.